And I know that we're hoping to get a visioning process done here shortly, but, if, say we execute an agreement for 2013, hopefully, we're gonna be able to come up with some target industries or more businesses by name. You're perfectly comfortable in working with us as far as the kind of industries and specific businesses that we would want to target, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions?
Good to have you here.
Well, good. I think that, Cheryl's talked about a comprehensive plan, those discussions about what we think should go where feeds into that, and the types of growth we'd like to see and what types of industries we'd like to see there is very important. So, very good.
Thank you, Tom.
It's collaborative effort.
All right. Okay, we shall move on to public comment. There is time allotted on the agenda. If members of the public wish to speak about city matters that are not on the agenda or that are not part of a public hearing. That being the case, we will move on to the consent agenda. Is there a council member who wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? How would council like to proceed with the consent agenda?
I move we approve the consent agenda. Second.
Motion Morrow, second Freeman, that we approve the consent agenda. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. New business item number 1. Consider a conditional use permit, CUP 12-03, to allow a motor vehicle tow lot within a C3 commercial district zoning district of 3.89 acres, located at 29960 West 191st Street. Amy.
Starts you off with the current zoning map showing the properties on C3 from earlier this year with ordinance 2396. Surrounded by C2 on the west, C3 on the east, and agricultural to the north and south. And this one is an aerial through the site showing the existing farmhouse and outbuilding. This is the site plan for the planning commission. The development would need to be in accordance with the site plan, which was approved by the planning commission in September, contingent upon approval of the conditional use permit. The requested use is a motor vehicle tow lot. Was considered to be the several continuances June, July, August, and September planning commission meetings. No members of the public make comments during public hearings. Commissioners briefly discussed the roads and land uses in the surrounding area. And then ultimately recommended approval 6-0, subject to stipulations on the screen. Any questions for staff?
Amy, I know this is something that's been going on for a while now. Has there, at any point, I know you referenced this or public comment during the meetings, but email correspondence or anything else, have any citizens, neighbors, anyone sent in any sort of inquiries of trying to objection at all? Have you received anything?
I don't recall receiving anything related to this property.
And no one on the planning commission acted as though they received any sort of objections?
Not that I recall.
Okay.
Other questions? This would be ordinance number
2409.
2409. How would council like to proceed with ordinance 2409?
I move that we pass ordinance number 2409 approving C1203 Martin's Tow Service to be rezone approximately 3.89 acres to C3, subject to the stipulations as described.
Motion Freeman, second Harrison, that we approve ordinance 2409. Freeman.
Yes.
Harrison.
Yes.
Gregorsek.
Yes.
Bodovich.
Yes.
Morrow.
Yes.
2409 passes. New business item number 2, consider passing ordinance number 2410, amending Title 13 Utilities, Chapters 13.15.010 and 13.40.010 to increase water and wastewater rates. Laura.
As we all discussed over and over again during this summer's budget presentation, the transfers from operating revenues in both the water and wastewater utility funds continue to be transferred to the development funds to make up for lack of significant building activity and impact fees related to that building activity. So we also talked about several times the impact of moving the school district, benefit district forward in the timeline, and all of these things combined. And also we talked about current budget needs based on the impact of what you do now to the out years. So all of those things combined, we landed on we need to increase water rates by 8% and wastewater rates by 11%. And that was included in the budget revenue forecast and the budget that you approved August 20th. So those two rate increases combined to an average utility customer of 5,000 gallons is $7.95 per month. And we've talked about all those numbers before.
I thought it was 2,500 gallons.
No, it's 2,000 gallons a person for 2.5 people a house. So average. Also, I took a look, just something to think about, because we didn't talk about this during budget, but as I was reviewing this, you know, we used to do 5% water year after year after year, and 8% sewer year after year after year. Do you remember going through that? Well, last year, for whatever reason, we deviated from that. And what we did last year was a 3% water increase and a 6% sewer increase. Well, now we have 8 and 11, and if you average it back, by golly, if we'd stayed on 5558888, we wouldn't have had this big spike. So even all the things we moved around, all the projects we moved around, really, had we just held to our precedent, it would have all been fine. And we wouldn't have had this spike this year. Hindsight's 20/20. But something to think about as we embark on budget discussions this next year.
What happens if we decline to pass this ordinance?
Well, what happens is, nothing for 2013, you have a fund balance policy that says you will have 6 weeks of operating revenue in your utility funds, which is equal to 12%. And right now, when we did the budget in August, the water fund was at, let me try to get it right. One of the funds was at 15, the water fund was at 15% and projected 2013. Sewer fund was 21%. I see that while I was on vacation, you canceled the spillway project. Because fund balance is figured as a percentage of expenditures, if you take that out and even the corresponding grant out, you're at 21% for water. So now you have 21% for both water and sewer. And if you decline to do this now, you have altered the out-year fund balances. And I can't tell you what I will tell you that it will make it worse, because the reason why we made this increase the way it is to keep those at the fund balance permanent. So if you don't do this now, you'll be doing a bigger one later unless we get some wonderful new development that makes huge amounts of impact. Because that's what's suffering now, and you still have debt to pay.
Tom Reader, you gotta help us with that.
And, you know, maybe a little bit, maybe is not a plan.
Heard that. I
Yeah,
was
hope, I believe it's hope is not a plan, I think that's a famous quote in this room.
One of the one of the elephants in the room that we always dance around is the utility fund as a whole, and looking at the reserves in the electric utility and treating it as, you know, a division taking profit, quote unquote, not really can't have profit, but taking the overage from that and using it to assist the other funds. You know, in working that through, but I think, you know, if we were to entertain that notion, it would need to be in a way that it's not a, you know, pulling a few bucks out of the coffee can and moving it over. I think it needs to be tracked and understood and so on, because obviously you don't want to create an imbalance and force rates higher than that, but you know, we have that available to us as a way to mitigate the impact of these types of increases on our customers, ultimately our citizens. There's a few that are non-residents, but very few. I don't know what the number is, but you know, the lion's share of our customers are citizens as well. So I mean, it impacts all of us, and I think, you know, having that discussion is important, something we should be considering.
And
Are
because
those-
sorry.
I'm sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Because I've been here since I was 4, I can tell you way back, we did just that. We equally divided our operating expenses, 4th general, and 4th the water, sewer, and electric. Every bill that came through the city was divided that way. So it wasn't very specific to something else.
So are those funds that you talk about, are they substantial enough to sustain that change? Or that contribution, I should
You're
say?
talking about the electric utility?
Mhm.
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
I
I
think,
mean,
But-
but
but-
we have to
but-
define what your change
But
is.
again,
No,
I
absolutely.
think the other, you know, understanding history is important as well, because, you know, for a long time, the electric utility was looked at as a cash cow, and there was not money put back in, you know, it was not reinvested into that utility. So we got to a point where there was a, you know, a lot of maintenance that needed to be performed. So, you know, it's absolutely important that we not look at it that way and you know, use it to keep property rates, you know, tax rates down falsely. You know, it needs, I think if we can utilize that, great, but not to the detriment of any of the utilities. We have to keep that investment sound as we go forward.
I think the key to that conversation is we have, it has to be policy-driven distribution. It can't be, we've got more money this year, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
It has to be driven by policy, and that was the key to develop that policy, and then bring it to council and making sure that's the most sound plan moving forward.
Well, it has to be sustainable.
Yeah,
I mean, you
that's
can't
what that's the
just do
policy
one year
driven
and-
towards it.
right.
Yeah.
And if I may piggyback on your comment and direct it back to Councilman Fodovich as another thought, when you asked about what happens if we don't do this, we aren't doing any maintenance in our water and sewer fund. You have no significant projects in here. So because we've been delaying maintenance and delaying projects that should be being done, and we're still working with these rates to take care of debt, you're pushing out not only a rate increase, but also maintenance and capital investment.
And we've seen what happens, you know, with our neighboring cities, with pushing off deferred maintenance. They've got
Billion with a B,
they've got $1 billion with a B of maintenance upon them that they have to do now,
mandated.
versus doing it as they go. You know, back to what Mr. Green and I have talked about, it's a substantial number, but it's not a billion number. That's something we've got to understand before we even get to the policy side of things. We've got to take care of, you know, the house.
There is much that can be done through the Sheriff's and Lake visiting session, and I think you're touching on that, and we've hit on it over and over again tonight, but simply put, the budget was built with these numbers.
Well, and I'd just like to say that, I understand the budget was built with these numbers, but in March of 2012, council voted to move forward on trying to implement a public utility board. Now, I know that we've kind of been saving this for a visioning session, but yeah, we had the overwhelming majority of the council that agreed that that was something that we should be moving forward with. And I'm going to be bringing that back up when we get to the visioning session.
So did, I don't recall if you said in that initial presentation, the sewer plant with Edgerton is not included in this rate?
It actually starts in 2014, and it was, in a vacuum, 2%. And it was $1 a month to the average resident. I gave those numbers during a presentation on that project.
But it's on top of, most likely, another, what did you say this was, wastewater, so.
5.8.
At this time, all things in a vacuum, that actually starts next year. We go to 7% now. These are all today's numbers. Next year, the wastewater increase actually dropped to 7%, and then it actually went to like 4%, and then even lower in the out years. Now that's if we didn't build in all the projects we might do, and we didn't then go crazy on add-in maintenance. That was just the numbers as we had them in here from 2013 to 2018. It actually decreased your sewer rate increases because we delayed the expansion, a much larger, more expensive expansion for the Kill Creek wastewater treatment plant that was going to be needed sooner. So because we pushed that out, the rates went down. If you were to discuss in your visiting that you wanted to begin again with maintenance and whatever, well, then that's not what will happen. But as it's built today, this is the biggest spike, and it was in the out years projected to go down. So you will have some room.
But that's going down, keeping all things equal, meaning we don't do any maintenance.
There wasn't very much built. There was a little in there,
So
but
I
it was
mean,
not enough.
realistically, if we want to do maintenance,
It won't be
we're
more.
just playing on, right,
Right.
Depending on what it is, line
unless
replacement.
something significant happens.
Sure.
And so on, yeah.
So we delayed an expansion because of this project here, and this project can be incrementally increased smaller than our Kill Creek plan. We had those discussions. So that delay is significant. Now, how significant? Well, that's up to you on what your vision is for infrastructure and maintenance, and but it was significant, so it gave you a gap to do some visioning with.
Laura, what is the percentage, and maybe this is not the question for you so much as our other public works experts here, but based on the cost per gallon of water and wastewater treated, how much of that is fixed and how, percentage-wise, and how much is variable? Would you
Let's have
hazard
that one to someone
hazard a
else.
guess?
No, I would not.
I mean, in other words, fixed costs, much like employee costs, the general fund, 60%, and then every 1,000 gallons after that is 40%, or?
Our general costs for producing water, and that's the only one I can speak to off the top of my head, is about $1.60 to $1.70 per 1,000 gallons. The remainder is going for debt and for the distribution system. It would be a similar cost for wastewater, however, our debt on the wastewater side is much larger. I don't know the exact figures on the wastewater side off the top of my head.
Hey, Jim, that $1.60 or $1.70, that includes labor?
Yes.
Is that a full, okay,
Yeah.
it's not just.
So that's a burden rate,
So what effect would conservation have on wastewater rates? Probably, I mean,
On the wastewater rates from...
or water, both, well, both, I guess.
Well, on the water rates, conservation would mean that cost would go up because we're selling less water, we're getting less revenue. And essentially the same thing on the wastewater side, although I'm not sure exactly what we can do to conserve on the wastewater other than I reduction, inflow and infiltration. If we could reduce that, we could make some considerable cuts in the amount of water that we treat. And the per thousand might go up a little bit that way, but the amount of water coming through the plant would go down hopefully fairly drastically. But it takes money to do that.
Yeah, what's the associated cost for that? I mean, that's an investment, what's the return on that investment to provide?
The return on investment, generally speaking, is about 2 for 1 based on industry standard. For us, I'm not exactly sure what it would be, but it would probably be about like the industry standard. So, you get a good benefit from doing the INI reduction, but it's not for free either. You have to spend a little bit of money to get it.
What is INI?
Infiltration and inflow. Infiltration is the water that seeps into the joints of the pipes. Inflow is water that flows in from the top.
So you're specifically referring to manhole replacement and line replacement, et cetera?
Yes.
So for the folks that are on video listening,
Sorry.
you're referring to this delayed maintenance is not, that we're delaying, is not taking care of inflow.
It's causing us to have to treat more, more water than what we normally would have to treat.
Which, with a dry season, that should have kept the INI down, obviously. So that helped there, but, with our recent rains, I would assume that our flows have increased.
Our flows have been considerably down during the drought.
Right.
And then now with our most recent rains, we have seen very little significant increase coming back because I think the ground is still soaking it up.
Still soaking it up. Okay. Good. Other questions?
Actually, I do have one more. And Jim, I know you've probably explained this to us a million times, but all of our customers, commercial and residential, pay the same rate.
Up to 40,000 gallons, then once any customer gets over 40,000 gallons, then the rate goes down.
And is there opportunity, based on what we see in other communities, for us to change that rate structure to minimize the impact to residents?
Absolutely. And most of the other communities around us have what we call a progressive rate, which means that as you use more, the rate goes up. And we have a regressive structure, which goes down when the usage goes up. The industry standard and the state KDHE is recommending it as one of our goals for conservation is that we go to a progressive rate setting, not rate study, but a progressive rate. And
That's conservation, though, also.
It is.
I mean, that's a forest conservation, maybe it doesn't reduce the cost per 1,000 gallon, but it does keep people from having to, for instance, buy a new sewer plant in Edgerton, right? Or-
somewhat, it certainly can have an effect of that.
Or
of that
expansion,
type.
Hillsdale,
Yeah.
identification of a second source.
I like that
another
idea.
plant.
Well,
But I guess the other question
The largest water
our largest-
usage is
so-
the USD 231,
Right,
so
right.
that's,
That's
I mean,
why
so
that
we're
rate
kind
like
of
that.
just, I mean, that's just part of the discussion that we have to talk
Yeah,
about,
we're
because
shifting it's a shifting pocket, right?
Well, who's the second largest?
I don't know.
And
off the top of
do
my
they
head.
come close to using 40,000?
Well, the average commercial user uses about 70,000 gallons a month.
So there's quite a few. I mean,
Quite a few of the commercial go into that rate also. The school is in that rate every month.
Are you talking about 10 or 50 customers that use 70,000 gallons?
I don't know the number, it's more than 10 or 12, I mean, it's like
15,
15
20?
or 20 at least,
Well,
maybe
yeah.
5.
So we,
But I think several of it is, when you look at the school district, you're looking at them as individual users, because I know they're billed, the high schools billed, the
By the
middle
building.
schools are billed, and so on. And I know that our car washes used to be fairly high users, but then when they implemented recycling systems, that dropped their use down, but our car washes would be our higher end users as well.
They're still in the months when they get a lot of use, they're still running about 60,000 gallons.
Okay. Because from a industry standpoint, restaurants, I guess, I can't think of it, I mean, it's not like New Century where you've got Unilever,
CFS West Holdings.
CFS West Holdings, those types of, Danisco, that are using a lot of water. We don't have anyone like that on our system, per se.
Other than the car washes, no, we don't have any industrial big water users.
Right.
Just the commercial, just with the number of customers and things.
But we could someday.
We could.
Because there may be some industries out there that use water to cool the products, the big data processing centers and stuff that sometimes located in business areas that have big electrical loads, et cetera. We've had this discussion in various ways,
Yeah.
and some of those I mean, I don't know how that affects anything, I'm just saying, we could have something out there that really isn't making dirty water, but using a lot of water.
Yeah, using a lot of water, right?
Yeah, a big cooling tower would certainly fall into that category. But what I'm thinking about is more like a food processing factory that would use a lot of wastewater or something of that nature, that would also create more, wastewater.
Don't we sell, I'm sorry, don't we sell bulk water though to New Century?
We do.
And what rate are they getting?
We charge them $250, $1,000 this year, and then we would normally go up whatever percentage. And I need to bring that contract back to you because we are trying to renegotiate a new contract right now.
And what,
We're pretty close to the agreement as to what we think would be acceptable to council and to their council.
and their alternative source is Olathe?
That's correct.
But as I recall, their rates were a little bit higher, weren't they?
And their rates are a little bit higher. They also have a clause in there that ratchets that up if they take more water.
Progressive.
Progressive, yes. So if they take less water from us and more from Olathe, then that would push them into another bracket and cause them to be considerably more than what ours is, or something like that.
And so how many gallons do they use?
I think it averages about 400,000 gallons a day.
And we want that business.
Well, so that's what I was gonna ask, that $400,000 a day, is that any benefit, or 400,000?
Gallons.
400,000 gallons a day, does that, I guess, I hate, keep our residential rates down? I mean, does it?
It certainly helps because we have little or no cost other than the production of the water, and a single pipe, if you will. I mean, it traverses just one way through. Our distribution system is not taxed hardly at all for that effort. And so, yes, we do. I think it does hold down our residential rates to some degree.
It's like with electric, if we get some large load, folks on there that, lots of electricity, 1 meter, that, scale begins to pay off. But again, excuse me, we still have to have, an affordable community, housing prices, taxes, water, all of those rates build into that component, so.
So at 40,000 gallons for other commercial users, the rate goes to what?
I'm not positive, but it used to be 465 and 360, and going in our percentages, it would still be in that same line. I just don't know what the numbers are.
465 to...
When our rate was 465, the over 40,000 was 360. And hopefully we've gone up since that number. I can't remember what the new numbers are.
So do we have any ideas to reduce, other than development?
Development.
Development is certainly one. We've done a few other things, but basically, if we're on the wastewater side, if we could just wait a couple of years, which we're pushing off the plant expansion, we were waiting. The rates, that starts to drop off a considerable amount, actually, and our rates can stabilize, which is what Laura was talking about in the out years, the percent we need to go up is considerably less. On the water side, we need to stop supporting wastewater with water, which we're also working on in our fees. A few years ago, we were supporting wastewater to the tune of $1 million a year. We're now down to, I think, $750 this year, or
Well, and they're right here. So, as you were talking about it, let's see. In 2011, the water fund transferred $1 million to wastewater. And now we're down to, hold on. Yeah. We you committed, you're closer, my eyes are getting really bad.
This year in 2012, it's 550,000 that we're transferring, and then in 2013, it's 200,000.
Right, and then and then we've tried to disentangle the water and wastewater funds this year, we talked about that. So that's moved left to one and put the other where it belonged in its own water or sewer bucket. So, sewer bucket, that's a terrible analogy, but anyway.
So getting back to the dollars that's in front of us, I mean, are we gonna be able to look at the PMs and, you know, put some effort in taking care of that side of the, business so that we don't incur these, you know, heavy
I
AHA fees?
think the main thing, I mean, it's not as if we're not doing maintenance. I mean,
No, that's
we're doing
not,
a lot as much as we can, it just isn't the more meaningful.
Yeah, you
replacements.
prioritize.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we have our crews around every day doing maintenance, it's just that, where you have an old line, replacing that line, so it's not happening.
Mhm.
Upgrading systems is not happening.
Best practice is not
Best practice
happening.
is correct.
Right.
And at this point, we're still kind of watching and waiting until that falls off.
Or development increases.
Right.
And the, you know, line replacement when we've got a road tore up rather than addressing a break in doing it. I think those are the kinds of things that you can do. It's not, you know, obviously all of the equipment is getting its regular preventive maintenance, but it's that ongoing replacement type over time, sewer lines and so on.
The heavier activities are not happening. The stuff that are done with our crews continues on and on.
How would council like to proceed with ordinance 2410?
I move we pass ordinance 2410, amending Title 13 Utilities, Chapters 13.15.010 and 13.40.010 to increase water and wastewater rates.
Second?
Motion Morrow, second Gregorczyk, that we pass ordinance 2410. Morrow.
Yes.
Gregorczyk.
Yes?
Glovich.
No.
Freeman.
Yes.
Harrison.
Yes.
2410 passes. Thank you, Laura. New business item number 3. Consider approval of a motion authorizing the Secretary of Transportation of the State of Kansas to execute a settlement agreement, release and indemnification with project number 46U2068-01 and 46KA0132-01, Johnson County with Amino Brothers Company Incorporated. David.
And as a person that's stated the council action form, those refer to the Moonlight Road projects, which are the intersection of Moonlight Road and Main Street, which runs from about relocation of Warren Street to approximately Madison Street. North Moonlight runs from approximately Madison Street to about Prairie Village Drive or University Drive, depending on which side of the road you're on. They were led as a separate projects, but they're separately funded. The intersection project has $1.5 million worth of federal funds in it. The North Moonlight project has, I should say has, since it's been for quite some time, about $750,000 worth of state funding, economic development. The project was led as a combined project in early '09 by KDOT. Since there is federal and state funding, it falls under KDOT administration. Since we are not set up to do the inspection or to administer our federal projects, KDOT basically held quite a bit of control. We fly supply the field staff to do the inspection out of KDOT following their procedure. The total combined bid is about $9.4 million. Deducting $2.25 million from federal and state of the award, left about $7.2 million for local funding, which is shared by the city and the county through the CARS program. Construction began in March of '09. In April of '09, Amino Brothers reported a conflict with the Casey Duck Bank south of US 56. Took a while to clear. The issue was it was lower deep enough. There were delays because formerly the North Supply building had their standby generator down, and both their feeds went through this duct bank. So KCP&L couldn't do anything until the CenturyLink building had its backup generator back online. So that was a delay. Throughout the process, we argued that it was a minor point, you could have moved somewhere else. But following the KCP&L claims adjustment procedure, there's first was a hearing, which I can go into a little bit, at the local office, and it went to the district construction engineer, and finally it went to the bureau chief. Following all these, move on to the next, kind of through the hearing process, as I mentioned, it was initially heard by the local, which denied the claim. We felt this could be dealt with fairly easy. Let's say the incident occurred in April. Amino Brothers, the contractor, filed their claim in September. Basically, it was a two-phase. He basically gave two prices. One was $2 million, and one was about $1 million, depending on whether or not the liquidated damages were assessed. They also told KDOT, the city, you need to respond within a week, or else the deal's off. Followed through that in September, October of '09, local office denied following KDOT procedures. Amino appealed that to the district office. At a hearing, KDOT asked us what we felt we were representing in continued denial. KDOT pointed out the fact, well, we probably should reconsider because if they continue on following the hearing procedure, we have to get past the bureau and next steps. We proposed a settlement where we would offer them a 95-day extension on time, which was back calculated from when the conflict occurred to when it was totally cleared. And in exchange, basically what we were working was to provide them relief from the potential liquidated damages, which were fairly heavy on this project. We also offered as part of the proposal, when we would waive, knowing full well we can't work in the winter, we'll work with you to do a suspension of time during the winter so that we can get the road up. The flip side was we needed to get the road open to traffic by full winter of 10, which was on the original schedule. We also wanted Amino to drop all claims against the city and the state, except for what would be considered a reasonable delay for remobilization because of the utility conflict. There's no denial of the fact it did impact them. However, obviously our opinion as to what the impact was in Amino's was somewhat different. Amino rejected the city's offer. We had our first hearing before the Kansas Department of Transportation and the Bureau of Construction chief in August of 2010. At that time, worked through it. We presented our case, saying our feeling was, yes, there was an impact of this delay. However, we felt that the contractors' methods and procedures were the issue. So KDOT said, well, there's lots of other issues going on here. Let's, Amino, you work to get the road open because all of our concern was to minimize the impact to the traveling public and open by winter of 2010. Now, one thing I will give Amino, they did change superintendents from '09 to 10 during the construction season of 10. We did have very good progress because they had now
kept that project moving. So, it was opened, basically had cleanup to do, which continued through the summer of 11, to mitigate our costs. Finally, when all the inspection work, we were down to punch list items, we released the train system inspector to minimize our costs, which we were paying. We were monitoring it with their assistance through KDOT. Work was finally wrapped up, and then KDOT issued a final completion in spring of this year. Mino submitted a revised claim. The first round of claims was the two-phase $1 million to $2 million. Submitted a revised claim for not only delays due to the water line, delays due to plan issues, delays due to coordination with the railroad, was reduced to around $750,000, plus or minus. With that, we went in and had a second hearing before the Bureau Chief of KDOT in July of this year. After deliberation, the Bureau Chief was recommending a reduction of that to a $355,000 settlement, which is presented here. But the 3 points of the settlement basically changes the completion date to avoid liquidated damage assessment, offers $355,954 to be added through change order through the Moonlight Main Street project, and it's basically a hold harmless on all parties. So if the agreement is accepted, it's done. Mino has signed the agreement, which you have in your packet. When you go back to the duck bank issue, we were all along feeling a reasonable cost was about $8,000, $8,000 to $10,000 on reload. However, there's been issues. There's the plans overestimated some of the quantities. Prior to coming into this, we were approximately 460,000 below the bid amount. If this is approved, will be a net for the 2 projects about 94,000 below the bid amount because of the quantity adjustments, adds and subtractions to the contract.
So what does that mean then? You're saying that basically offsets the $355,000?
Right, we're still a net below award, we're still about $100,000 below where the contract was awarded at with this $355,000. So, the flip side on this is, are we content with this? I would say I'd rather not go this way. However, the downside is, the next step is district court. The contracting authority, KDOT, has now recommended that this is a settlement. Should be, I'm not a lawyer, but should we go to court, very likely this may be where we start. At this point, I would recommend acceptance of this. There's, below the bid amount, the project's done. It's time to put this project behind us and move on.
Kind of hold your nose and approve it.
Well, that's my recommendation. Yeah, it has not been an easy process for anyone. The voter public have experienced it heavily.
Yeah, there was a lot of impact on the community. There was, and we had no control at all.
And that's kind of the nature of the way these are set up. Is it's because we have federal funding and state funding involved, we have to go through the KDOT administrative process. Now, the project we're working toward on Center and Main is through a different program. We do have control over that project. KDOT will reimburse us, but it's through our procedures. We have control of the contract. As long as we buy right away following federal guidelines, that's their criteria.
So if we have no control over the project, why would this come before us?
Well, we're paying for
Okay.
But, I mean, so this $350,000, we said no.
it.
That's from funding, or is that money in our pocket? If we were to.
It is, you have, if you set down, short term, you would basically have reduced debt for the project, it's debt finance. We have adequate debt authorization to pay this. We are below the contract amount, we're basically below what we thought we were going to be for the project. I'm not saying that is an excuse or justification, but what you have, the reality is, sometimes you, contractors will see an opening and will work it. And, there were plenty of openings on this project. We have worked diligently to mitigate their impact. We've worked with them to try and make the job easier. We have worked with them to allow them to close roads that were supposed to be kept open to try and keep the thing rolling. But bottom line is, sometimes you end up in these situations, and they come in here and you end up here.
So if you voted no, worst case scenario is that 100,000 that we're in the green for could disappear, plus.
If you voted no, yes.
I mean, worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario is the contractor would then have the option to file suit against the city, and the KDOT would basically, through the hold harmless clauses in our contract, would basically, it's all on us. Right now, it's all on us anyway, because the federal and state money was expended a long time ago in this project. And so right now, you're dealing with just us and the county.
And if we did vote no, we would have to have the confidence that a jury of 12 would find in favor of the government and not in favor of the contractor.
That's correct.
Following KDOT's recommendation.
Following
of
KDOT's
approving,
recommendation. And, yeah, it's a,
So is that the most they would get though, is a 355?
I have no idea what they would.
it's opening the door. They could go back to they would start their argument, I would assume, back at their 2,000,000, 1.98 in their,
They could go for the next
0.97.
We'd be incurring, I know we would have our defense costs too. so-
Plus costs.
Legal costs to get it.
Plus costs.
Now, the computer-
Which would not be carried through any of the funding that's in place for the project, that come from a totally, completely different pool of
That is
money.
correct.
Is it any of this insured? I mean, is there any kind of a,
The city, basically.
Yeah.
the city doesn't have insurance against this sort of thing?
Yeah. This is.
Are we sure? I mean,
I,
it's the public.
yeah, it's a contract amount, it's to be paid out of the project funds. It's a negotiated, it's like
Like a
any claim, and this claim probably hurts more than a lot of them, because many claims are, we've got this, this, and this. We say, yeah, we'll pay this, hey, we're not gonna pay that. In this case, like I said, I'm not thrilled to be up here presenting this to you, but I think it's in the best interest just to deal with it.
What is the expected cost to litigate this? Jim, any ideas?
I have no idea. You could have a very extensive jury trial.
50,000?
Lots of, you could exceed that
Easily.
if you really, you're gonna have to have all the witnesses, the experts. You could exceed 50,000.
So do we have a defensible case?
I wasn't involved at all in the settlement, so I can't answer that.
When does this have to be decided? That's my next question.
I think you need to decide, you need to vote on it.
And why is that?
The contract, at some point, the contractor is going to say, no, I don't want to do it. It basically, we've been dealing with this, working through the issues for 3 years now. We've gone through three levels and 4 hearings with KDOT. The contractor knows the system. knew that they could continue to appeal it. We've now got the contracting authority giving us a recommendation of $355,000. I think when you weigh everything, the way you have to look at it is the project's over, we're still $100,000 below bid. We've got what we paid for, and,
But that is sort of what I'm hearing is really why this number is in there, is because there's money left in the project that we budgeted, and so that makes it an easier pill to swallow. Is that?
The other thing that I think we need to clarify is, this is a loan eligible cost.
yes.
If we do not go to the settlement and decide to do litigation, that's not a reimbursable or a loan eligible cost, so it's city money, correct, general fund money?
Really, it's okay. But it's also cost eligible too.
And, okay, and it probably take us close, when I've been in cities and we've taken things to trial, it takes almost a year to get it there with a lot of experts, and we have generally not gotten to trial less than about $200,000. It's very expensive to get to trial.
How much was it?
$200,000, because by the time you go almost a year, and you line up all your experts, and you go to all the preparation and all the depositions and everything that's involved in getting it to a trial, if you go to a trial, you could be talking almost $200,000.
But don't you think that we don't have any, I mean, if Jim wasn't involved in it and doesn't have a legal opinion, we don't really know what we have to deal with, whether we're in the right or the wrong here. I mean, it certainly seems worthwhile to get a legal opinion on this contract and who's at fault before we decide to roll over and pay that kind of money. I mean, whether we're below the budget or not.
But I guess one thing you also want to consider, this was an ARRA project.
No, this is not an ARPA.
This is not an ARPA project?
This follows just.
Just standard federal.
Federal.
Standard federal guidelines. So we had no choice in contractor selection.
That's correct.
The list of contractors was provided, and Amino was on it. Amino has extensive experience in billing these types of contracts, and much more experience than we have paying these types of contracts. I would suggest that perhaps Amino's attorneys are very adept at ensuring that their clients are paid what they believe is due them. And as much as it pains me to deal with this, and as much as it pained me that we had to use Amino for our 56 intersection project, after this began, mitigating costs, if the council chooses to take the risk to move forward, that's certainly a risk that's within your purview.
Jim, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Jim, I've got a question for you. Excuse me, Cheryl. I know you haven't read all the T's and C's, but where is the verbiage in here that tells us that there needs to be a decision made tonight, kind of to Larry's point, versus some sort of gray area for that due diligence process? I'm not talking, weeks and months, I'm talking days and weeks. Is there any verbiage in there that we can lean on for that opportunity?
I haven't reviewed the contract, but.
It's been provided to us by KDOT, it's written by their attorney.
I understand.
And,
I think the important thing to clarify here was, I know Larry asked, or kind of suggested that they knew how much was left in here, so they knew how much to ask for. The way I read it, it was the hearing officer that came to that settlement amount. It wasn't Amino saying, this is what we want. It was the settlement officer that came and said, here's what we think is the fair value for that, and then Amino agreed to it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then KDOT, essentially they said, this is all the fight we have left in this one, and we're ready to settle.
It's not your money, it's not their money. It's easy to
Well,
say.
you're right, but, it's.
The way the hearing went down was we basically, we convened at about 9 in the morning, we argued till about noon. Basically, it was concluded, KDOT said, why don't you all go eat lunch and come back? We left, Tim, myself, and then Dennis Weiner, who was Trans Systems, who was doing the field work for us. Came back and said, well, we reviewed it, there's a lot of this we're going to throw out, however, we feel that because of the 95 days and added costs, this is what we feel is reasonable. What do you think? Well, KDOT's saying, what do you think? Basically, with couching it as your options litigation. But they are the hearing officers, the one that came off, went through and reviewed the $750,000 revised submittal, threw out half of it, came up with $350,000.
And amazingly, it fits within our budget.
Now, the hearing officer probably was less concerned about that than me now, but that's what we do.
Did they have an attorney present in that meeting?
No, Mino did not have a attorney at the meeting.
But they certainly got legal advice.
Right, I
And
can't speak.
we haven't had any legal advice in this entire,
Because Trans Systems claims review, we presented our best case to KDOT. We presented a case saying, yes, there is damage. However, we don't feel that the delays can be attributed to this. We've always presented we would pay a reasonable amount. Unfortunately, KDOT continued the process. We presented what we felt was a good case. KDOT didn't care for it. They feel like there's enough exposure there that this is a reasonable settlement in their opinion. The other downside too, and time plays in Amina's favor. When it goes to court, who knows? The longer they wait, the better off they are. This thing's dragging on for years, and by the time it goes to trial, I don't know.
So KDOT has no meat in the game at the end of the day?
KDOT's money ran out quite some time ago.
So they don't?
That's correct.
It wouldn't be, if it did go to litigation, it wouldn't be a matter of 355 or zero. It would be an X amount or a very big X amount if they were to win, plus the cost that we have. It never will go to us having to pay $0, because we've said all along that there is some responsibility on our end, and we've offered lower amounts at some point, but they'll be able to come back and say, well, they've always offered some money, so it's never going to be $0. And then we're going to have legal costs that would go into the fact that we're still going to have to pay them essentially something.
That's correct.
but you argued that the amount that you thought we should have to pay them is what?
We never really came up with the exact.
But I mean, you have a number in your mind.
Well, what was submitted was somewhere around, the actual part attributable to the duck bank, which opened the door for all this, was around, $8,000. But the problem we run into.
That was the cost to work around that duck bank.
That was basically the remobilization, however, but then you end up with issues on, we were arguing, well, the contractor had a responsibility to mitigate. Well, our KDOT would argue, well, our specs don't require that. They can do this or that or the other. It was basically came up, well, this is our contract, you don't understand. And it was finally, all I can say is.
Wait a minute, who said this is our contract?
KDOT.
Said this is our contract?
It's
or
our
are you?
KDOT, you're following, basically, it's a case of it's a case where they have the authority and we have the responsibility because of this type of setup. Good, bad, it's not a great situation, but to get their money, if you want to play the game under the old scheme that we were working with, that's the game you have to play. So to get the $2.25 million that we did apply to the project, this is price of over. Because KDOT trumps.
Let me just interject here for a second. I mean, I'm scribbling some basic numbers. The first claim that Amino filed was for almost $2 million. By the time it came back in July of 2012, it was $731,000. It's 160% less than what they were asking for initially. The KDOT, the state, has lowered it down to $355,000, which is another 60% decrease from what these folks are asking for. We're coming in under the contract amount by almost $100,000. I don't like the whole thing. It stinks. But litigation costs money and it costs time, and there is risk of additional loss, there is risk of, again, who knows, they might look for us to pay their attorney's fees. And if we're gonna incur a $200,000 attorney fee, they're going